Ric Edelman and many other prognosticators in the financial planning arena say you should expect in the future to live well beyond 100 and do your planning based on that. And I just disagree with that adamantly. And I want to talk about that here a little bit because I think it makes people even more nervous than they should be when it comes to their own financial planning projections. And I just want to base this on I just don't see it there. So let's talk about that. I think it's critically important to understand the reality base of financial planning as opposed to prognostications on how long you're going to live and thus how long you're going to need your money to last. So don't forget to subscribe. Of course, comments, everything helps me. A thumbs up helps me with the YouTube algorithm. So definitely anything you want to provide there is helpful to me. All right, so I'm a fan of Ric Edelman. I think Ric Edelman is one of the good guys in the business. He comes across a little bit egotistical, in my opinion, nowadays. He's definitely moved on to just being financial planning extraordinaire to more of a futurist is what I think he'd probably label himself as. And anytime someone and he didn't call himself that, but anytime someone gets into the technical aspects with technology is going to solve the rugby robots, I chuckle at that. Ric Edelman did a talk on a podcast I listened to from Michael Kitces' podcast, which talks about you're probably going to need 4 careers through your life for a newborn today. And essentially the idea was, you're going to live, your first career will be to your 40, your second career till you're 80, your third career till you're 120, and so on. And I challenge that. But I get what he's saying. I mean, he's saying, look, you can't expect to just die at 77 and basic Social Security. I get that. I think he's trying to be a little bit counterintuitive and towards a challenging your thought process on your own life expectancy. But I think there is a little bit of a self-interest here as well. And what I mean by that is if you're not saving, if you're not investing, if you're not using the various funds and stuff that these guys offer, you could be a poverty when you're 83 years old and still alive and kicking when you could have had a second career. I don't know. So let's dive. I want to show you something here, and this is interesting to me. This is from the Social Security website, and they say a man today reaching the age of 65 can expect to live until he's 84.3. A woman today can expect to live to 86.7. All right. So again, if you're 65 today, you have a life expectancy in your man of 19 more years. All right. That's it. So 65 today, you're going to live until you're 84.3. The point about that is Social Security break-even analysis is anywhere between 78 and 82. So the average person essentially will do better if the average person delays taking Social Security beyond his full retirement age, because again, the break even is basically 78 to 82, depending on your certain specifications. All right, whatever. Now I want to say, what's my life expectancy for me specifically, for old Josh here? And I thought this was pretty cool, and you could put it in there. And I'm going to say I'm a male, and I'm going to say I am born July, and we'll just say July 1st, 1970. All right, so we're born July 1st, 1970. I am a male. And that means I'm 48 in 4 months or something like that. And so the Social Security says as of today, I have an additional life expectancy of 33.6, which means my estimated total life expectancy, my estimated total years of life are 82, which differs than if I was 65 years old today, when I have a life expectancy as a 65-year-old man at 84.2 or whatever it was. Now, once I hit 62, which is the first age I can take Social Security, my additional life expectancy at that point would be 22.6 years, 84.6 right there. Once I hit 67, my additional life expectancy will be another 19 years and such. So you can see this. The longer you live, the more your total years remaining to live will be. And that inherently makes sense because, and I'll show you here in just a second in a chart. But again, as of today, as a 48-year-old 0.4 man, my life expectancy is only 82 years old. All right. So I want to share with you this thing from the Society of Actuaries. And I used this chart the other day to show you the benefits of drawing mortality tables based on an earlier mortality table than today in terms of increasing your ability to get annuity income if you have an older mortality table versus a newer mortality table. So I use this quite a bit in the Society of Actuaries. Say risk is opportunity. I want to share with you this thing. This is pretty cool. All right, so here's in 1900. I want you to focus on this guy right here. That's your life expectancy for a newborn in 1900. Your life expectancy for a newborn in 1900 was about 48 years. That's it. And the reason for that is because of the vast majority of deaths per 100,000 people in the U.S. was infants. Of 100,000 deaths, 4,000 or 4% were infant mortality. The second point, so you can see it starts dropping off. And even here, probably about this at 2 to 3 years old, 1 to 2 years old, 2000. But then it drops off significantly until we hit about 72, or about 1,750 deaths were attributed to a 72-year-old age person per 100,000 in the U.S. So life expectancy essentially means if you could escape dying in the first 4 or 5 years, you had a pretty good chance of living for many years to come. But if you, for a newborn, your life expectancy is only 48. Now, I want you to look at this right here. In 1900, if you were able to live until you're 65, your life expectancy there was about 77, maybe 78 years old. All right, because again, once you survived the first wave of death and destruction, it wasn't likely for you to die at all up until you're about 60, about 70 years old. It wasn't very likely, relatively speaking, for your life expectancy. So if you could survive that first 3 or 4 years, you had a pretty good chance of living until you're roughly 78 to 80 years old. All right, so that's in 1900. Let's watch how things change. Boink, boink, and boink. 30 years later, we can see the infant mortality numbers have dropped, not quite a bit, but not still in the 3,000. And so now, if you were born in 1930, a new baby, your life expectancy went up from about 47 to 60, a pretty significant increase. However, for someone who was 65 in 1930, life expectancy hardly changed at all. You're going to live to about 78 years old. Someone who's 65 in 1900, your life expectancy was 78 years old. So let's keep going. 60 years later, a newborn had basically 2,000 of every 100,000 deaths were attributed to newborns. Yet the majority by far of deaths per 100,000 people were people around the age of 80, as the tip was right here. And that just says the infant mortality is declining rapidly, which means people are living longer, which means longer living people are dying more so than babies. And so you can see that here. And now we have a life expectancy for a newborn of 70 years old in 1960, and a life expectancy for someone who hit 65 was at right about 80 or so. All right. So again, we went from 47 to 70 for a newborn in those 60 years preceding. And then we went from 77 to 78 to about 80 or so for someone who is 65 years old. Let's keep going. And let's go to 2000. Now look at this. Now the newborn infant mortality is a small 750, and that's still bad. By far and away the largest amount of deaths per 1,000 in the U.S. until you hit about 55 years old. But the vast majority of people who are dying are about 85 years old in terms of number of deaths per 100,000 people. So once you hit 85, now you're on the precipice. Not very many people survive beyond 85 relative to the amount of deaths per 100,000 people. So our life expectancy for a newborn in 2000 was about 78. Our life expectancy for someone who is 65 in 2000 was about 83. Fast forward to 2010, it was about 84, which is exactly where we put it in the Social Security system, which I just showed you. Life expectancy for a male today who's 65 years old in 2018 is about 84 years old. Life expectancy for a female who's in 2018 and 65 years old is about 86 years old. So the life expectancy numbers have not changed that much over the last 120 years, from 1900 to 2018, basically 120 years. They've gone from 77 to about 85. That's it. That's a 8-year increase in life expectancy over 120 years. All right. That's it. Now, so what that tells us is yes, the newborn infant mortality numbers have dropped dramatically, which means there's a high probability of you being born today, you're going to live, until you're in your late mid-70s. Whereas again, if you survive until you're 65, there's not much of a difference from what it was in 1900. What does that tell us? Well, there's two things going on here. One, the first and foremost reason is because we've got rid of smoking. The vast majority of people don't smoke anymore, which would be one reason why Ric Edelman is right, is that we're going to see an increasing life expectancy once you hit the age of 65. And the reason for that is because the smokers are essentially dying off and they're being replaced by non-smokers. So The baby boom generation, who's going to be in this number up here, the vast majority of people who are smokers are in that generation, and they're going to start dying off, if that already. Now, that sounds crass, I know, but in terms of the statistical numbers, has nothing to do with one individual. It has to do with the population at large. So those baby boomers are going to die and thus replaced with healthier people, which inherently will increase the life expectancy for sure. But will it increase it by any significant amount? Yeah, I mean, I think a couple years for sure. Absolutely, because those smokers will die off, replaced by non-smokers would probably live another 4 or 5 years. So we can easily see that your life expectancy in 20, 30 years from now, when the baby boomer generation is dead, will be 90 years old, maybe even 92 for someone who's 65 in that day. But 120, 130, nah, it's not going to be there. And the reason we see that is because, look, we're seeing a tightening of the differences between babies, people who hit 40, and people who hit 65. They're moving gradually to the right in terms of life expectancy, but they're not moving any significant amount. The significant amounts have already been established by the lessening of infant mortality. And what's going to happen now is once you are beyond the infant mortality, where it's just as normal as just being a 10-year-old, and it probably never will be, because having a baby is a risky proposition, no other way around that. But without question, that won't have much to do with the fact that people live longer. We've already kind of got that behind us in terms of infant mortality affecting life expectancy for living well beyond your 90s. The issue is the smoking, and that's, again, will be gone, which will be rectified in the next 20, 30 years. And then, of course, there's cancer. So if we don't find a cure for cancer, none of this is going to change much. No other way around it. Heart disease, cancer, things of that nature. That is the big bugaboo that we have, as smoking is no longer the big issue. And so cancer and whatnot will, unless that has a cure, and, look, I don't follow that closely, but from my research, I don't see any, again, my research, there's not much. But I do read some articles about, hey, is there potential? And the answer is not much. I mean, there could be, for sure. Don't get me wrong. But until we find cures for cancer, the life expectancy isn't going to change all that drastically, where you're going to be living to your 120, 130. Now, Ric Edelman and these guys would say, and I'm not trying to pick on Ric Edelman, I'm just saying his thought process, and I agree with it, is that there will be a technology that will find the cure for cancer, and we're laying our hat on that for it to be found, and thus we'll live until we're 120, 130. Maybe. I just think that's a crapshoot. I don't know. Will there be a technology to find the cure for cancer? Maybe. How does that affect your financial planning today, though? You can't expect to live to 120. You just can't. You should not do that, because if you do, you're going to underutilize your resources, and you're not going to spend enough because you're thinking, I got to plan until I'm 120, and that's not good. You should enjoy it while you can, because don't forget, just because you can also find a cure for cancer, now your body might be there until you're 100, but your mind won't be either. So enjoy it while you can, first and foremost. And again, we're putting a lot of weight on the science that says you can find a cure for cancer. Well, how many people are actually be studying this relative to going into journalism, relative to going, see what I'm saying? That's the whole thing with STEM. How many people are going into these fields of study relative to going to the easier things? And the education in America, again, and it might be Chinese, it might be Japanese. Well, Japanese is dying off. India's probably the place where we'll find that for sure, but certainly not. It's going to be tough to be in the U.S. with the vast majority of people getting indoctrinated in just social studies, the social sciences that aren't, they're just political indoctrination units. That's for sure. And so I don't have a whole lot of hope that United States people are going to find that. I do think it's probably India with the vast majority of people. China not so much, because they're having a hard time with their own population. But in terms of demographics, the best place is probably going to be India for sure. So we shall see, but I'm not hanging my hat on that for sure. But let's keep looking at this. I think there's some other interesting stuff that you'll find interest in. If we can get there we go. All right, cool. So I want to show you something else here. Why is it not? There we go. Okay. So yeah, right here. So we got changes over the century. All right, so here's, again, that's that table I just looked at. And you can see the graph. This is 1900 in blue. Light gray is 1950. Dark gray is in 2000. And you can see the infant mortality just drops off a cliff. And so the dark gray is at 500. Now we're seeing the chart, the mountain graph, move to the right and up, which means older people are living longer and longer and longer, which means they're not dying as early, which means they're dying a whole lot later. But you can see not a significant difference here between the 100 and the years that we had before in terms of the number of deaths. By far and away, the vast majority of deaths now are people in their 80s and 70s and 80s, without question. Whereas before, once you could, is children. So that's interesting to me. Life expectancy improvements. The light gray is if you're 65 years old, and just not much. I mean, look at that. From 1900, about 78, to 2000, about 82. That's a life expectancy improvements. The vast, drastic one is for infant mortality, 40 to about 78. And that, again, the point is cancer is killing us for sure, heart disease and that things. Now, I do want to show you, they do talk about obesity in this, and I think it's interesting. Let's keep going down. Life expectancy at 65, again, this is just general population. If you're 65, 78 years old, and then at 1970, and if you're 65, you're 83 years old roughly in 2000. Just not a significant increase at all. Remaining life expectancy at 65 in 1970, your remaining life expectancy on average was 15 years. Till you're 80, and now it's about 17 years in 2000. Now it's about about 18 years, depending on if you're a man or woman. All right. So I just want to show you. So we talk about longevity factors and some of the stuff, and I frankly don't care. Women live longer. We know that. Life expectancy by county. I talk about this in another chart, but it's pretty interesting nonetheless. Orange is dying sooner, blue is dying later. In 1985, significant increase in life expectancy. And again, a lot of that's going to be because smoking, and we are living a little bit longer for sure, but don't forget now, it depends on your birth rate. If you can survive the first couple of years, there's likelihood you'll live pretty long. No other way around that. Tobacco use, right there. Lifestyle. Obesity is a current issue because tobacco use is taken aside because most people don't smoke. Obesity. U.S. obesity rates. And here's the thing, they're using BMI. And I've always body mass index. In some ways, I challenge that because I have a high body mass index, which says I'm obese. But I lift weights. I mean, I don't eat that badly. My triglycerides are low. My cholesterol is high. Cholesterol is just not a starter anymore. But because I work out, I'm a 5'9.5" frame body, and I'm about 190 pounds. I come as obese. So some people say we have an obesity crisis. And to some degree, I agree with that. Eating all the carbs, eating crap food for sure. But in others, it just depends on the situation, the individual. But without question, I mean, we have a higher obesity epidemic than we did before. And if we are going to use BMI, body mass index, to equate to obesity and earlier diagnosis of diabetes and heart attacks, and this will offset the gains we make from smoking cessation, whatever, it's declining. So if you have a decline in smoking, but we have an increase in obesity in mass on adults, we're simply going to have a longer and longer, more people dying, not because of smoking cancer or related illness, but because of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes and whatnot. And I just find that interesting for sure. And they talk about it. So that's all I kind of want to talk about. But again, the issue that we're all going to live until we're 120 and plan accordingly, and you should never spend any money. Oops. And you should never spend any money because of that. I just find, frankly, not correct. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. We're laying our hat on something that may or may not transpire, i.e. the solving of cancer. And it's just not enough to do that. So hope this helps at least alleviate some concern that you have that, I can't retire. I got to stay in my crappy old job because I can live for them so long. I just don't see it, my friends. Plan until you live until 90. I think that makes sense. But I certainly wouldn't plan to live into 110. I just don't see the evidence there at all. So as always, subscribe down below, share the YouTube channel with your friends, go to the blog at heritagewealthplanning.com, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.